Director of TXUUJM Justice Ministry, which welcomes you tonight. Our featured speaker is New York Times bestselling author, columnist, and political commentator Steve Phillips. We will be in conversation tonight, and you also will join in that conversation. Mr. Phillips has a most recent book, How We Win the Civil War, Securing a Multiracial Democracy and Ending White Supremacy for Good. We are also honored to be joined by Pablo DeJesús, Executive Director of TXUUJM Partner UUs for Social Justice out of DC. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight, for being in this work with us. And I would like to invite Pablo to light our chalice. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Reverend Erin. And yes, indeed, TXUUJM Justice Ministry is a great and wonderful valued partner of UUSJ here in Washington, DC. And thank you, Steve, for joining us this evening. I have been telling every UU I know that I think your book is one of the most important books this year, and it's important for every UU to read it and understand how it informs our work. And with that in mind, beloveds, I like this chalice, which you may or may not be able to see, to open a sacred space, a contemplative space, a deliberative space. And I ask us, let us pray. Spirit of life, Spirit of love, let us join together and step into our power. May love eternal, love with all its equanimity, grant us the fortitude to meet the moment we are living through. May our hearts crack open in response to this important season for our nation and the globe. In the foreground, we have the chaos of current events. In the background, we have the pervasive challenges to our civic institutions. All about us, the mounting threats to the health of our peace and our democracy. Sacred love, grant us the civic bravery to speak up in public policy, legislative matters, and other public discourse. Grant us the wisdom to grow, curate, and leverage our power and make some good trouble. Grant us the compassion to share that power across the divides of race, class, gender, and age. Grant us the grace to participate in the fusion politics and coalition building that will be transformative for our nation and our own hearts. Help us to recognize that we have the opportunity to advance real solutions and participate in a movement to reform the current paradigm. Help us to know that now is the time to chase that dream of beloved community. Help us to remember that we are the ones we've been waiting for. Give us the sacred dreams needed to excite our imagination for the opportunities before us to reshape our body politic. Let us hear Steve's message and understand how important it is for our intended work. Let his insights help us step into our power. May it be so. Amen. Ashe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pablo. And thank you to everyone from UUSJ for your ongoing partnership and your fierce advocacy in the nation's capital, which we are often blessed to participate in with you. You all are such amazing partners. And we found out about Steve Phillips and his work from our partners at UUSJ. So thank you for that. Just a little bit more about our esteemed speaker tonight. Steve Phillips, as you heard, gave a powerful talk earlier this year with UUSJ. He is a national political leader, civil rights lawyer, and a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. This talk for us as Unitarian Universalists, and especially us in Texas, where the work is constant, it is a unique opportunity for us to equip our spirits, our minds, and our community for the work ahead. We are getting close to our UU the Vote activity. Some of us are already started. Our climate work is gearing up with our national partners. There is much to do. And you, if you haven't gotten the emails yet from Michelle and me, you are called to the Texas Capitol on Tuesday for a hearing related to border issues. So with all of this going on, Steve, we are so thankful to welcome you into the Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry community tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you guys.
Thank you. Well, I know that every time I introduce someone at a TXUUJM event, there's much more to them than their little blurb. So before we even get to the book, I'd love to invite you to share with us more about you, your story, how you came into this, this role in your professional life, if you'd like, or fun facts, your choice.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. There was, I was reflecting during the songs and during the introduction, and that was actually really kind of re-grounding me in some of the formative experiences and forces in my life in terms of this, songs from the civil rights movement. I mean, I am quite literally a child of the civil rights movement, that I was, born, and my family desegregated our neighborhood in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, back in 1964. They wouldn't sell the house to my parents because they were Black, had to get a white civil rights lawyer to buy it and deed it over. My brother was the first Black student at the local elementary school. I read all of the biographies of Martin Luther King in our local elementary school when I was a child. My first memories as a 4-year-old going to see Martin Luther King when he was in Cleveland. And so that was a very formative time for me. And then those experiences really shaped me as well when I was in college and becoming more politically active. And then the other aspect, in terms of what we're doing here as well, is that I grew up in the church. My grandfather was a minister at Glenville Church of God in Cleveland, and so that whole tradition was very formative for me as well. And so, civil rights and the faith journey and politics have all been forces in my life and influences in my life, and really came together for me in 1983 and 1984, when Reverend Jesse Jackson ran for president and really brought the civil rights movement with the language of faith into the political sphere. And I was 20 years old at the time, and it was, formative and transformative to the extent. Actually, I saw we did a book signing event in Berkeley the other day, and somebody brought me a T-shirt from Jesse Jackson's campaigns in the 80s and asked me to sign it. They said that on our podcast that it's like a drinking game every time I mention Jesse Jackson or one of his quotes and whatnot. So those are experiences that I've had, and I guess the only thing I would also add is I'm delighted to be with you today. In general, because Texas is very critically important, but also in particular for me in multiple ways. Right? I have family in Pearland, Texas. My nephew and his family live there. I have his son, my great nephew, just finished Texas A&M. My great niece is at Texas State. And so I have family there. And on top of that, it really is my social change priority is Texas, and drawing upon the lessons from the past decade, where my wife and I were privileged to be among the earliest supporters of Stacey Abrams on that journey of transforming Texas, of transforming Georgia, so that the literal successor to Martin Luther King, Raphael Warnock, can be sent to the U.S. Senate, changing the composition of the Senate, changing the entire priorities and policies of the whole country. Texas can play a similar role in this country over the course of the next decade. And so I'm trying to learn those lessons and focus in particularly on Texas and working with people on that arena.
I think we just lost Steve's audio. Steve, hang on one second. There you go.
Oh.
Just your last sentence.
Oh, I said, for all those reasons, I'm delighted to be with you and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. Well, I have to say, every time we welcome a guest from somewhere else, it seems that they do have Texas connections. So indeed, we really are this interconnected web, and it does hearten me to feel like we are all family in that way. So thank you for sharing some of your story, and it heartened me very much to have a chapter about Texas in your book. Thank you for prioritizing us. My predecessor, the Reverend Chuck Freeman, used to talk exactly like you were saying about what Georgia did and what Texas could do if we were organized, mobilized, focused. So we're excited to recommit our core, as you were talking about with the music, reground ourselves in that truth, right? Because we often get that message that it's not possible. It absolutely is possible. Doesn't mean it's not hard. So thank you so much for what you shared. So many of the folks here tonight, I'm sure, will be excited to get your book or books, but haven't read it yet. So would you like to give us a little bit of a primer? I imagine there are some folks who are saying to themselves, how do we win the Civil War? What does he mean? So I'll turn it over to you to kind of set the groundwork for the conversation.
Yeah, so originally, this is my second book. My first book was Brown is the New White, which I wrote in terms of talking about my own experience coming out of the civil rights movement. It seemed obvious to me that Obama's victory and presidency were outgrowths of the civil rights movement and the changing composition of the country. But I was alarmed to discover that that was not conventional wisdom. People thought that, Obama was an outlier and this unique figure in politics and didn't understand the movement underpinnings and the demographic composition. So I wrote that book to try to outline and illustrate and quantify, frankly, what was the composition of the Obama electorate and where things were actually moving. And just the essence of that book being that historically politics in this country has been a contest between white people, that you had conservative whites battling with the more progressive whites over the whites in the middle. And the progressive whites, did not have enough numbers to be determinative. And that's why I had to try to win people over in the middle. And there just weren't enough people of color in the country, let alone in terms of being able to vote. But with the 65 Civil Rights, the Voting Rights Act, and then the Immigration Naturalization Act, the composition of this country has changed fundamentally to where now people of color were 12% of the population in the mid-1960s and are now 40% of the population. And so what that has meant is that progressive whites, now allied with people of color, are actually the majority of people and the majority of the electorate, and that electorate is growing every day. And so that's what I was trying to lay out in the first book. And then the publisher came to me in April of 2020 and asked me about writing a second book. And I said, the country was so divided. We were, almost 4 years into the administration of the prior president, and so much, hostility and demonization, of immigrants and people of color and whatnot. And I was like, well, why don't we use the Civil War as a metaphor to explain what's actually going on? And then 8 months later, people carrying the Confederate flag, wearing sweatshirts saying MAGA Civil War, January 6, 2021, stormed the United States Capitol, hunted down our elected officials, and tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power within our country. I was like, well, this is not so metaphorical. And so, and particularly when I got into the research in the book in a deeper way, and this is what I try to spend the whole first half of the book articulating, is that the Confederates and ultimately their ideological and genealogical heirs have never stopped fighting the Civil War. And it's really most apparent in almost immediately actually even before that. I think it's important to realize for this moment that we're in, that the Civil War itself and the South succeeding from the Union came about because the candidate who was backed by Black people won. The losing side could not accept the election results, and as a result of that, seceded from the Union. And so that's relevant to this moment in time in terms of understanding what we're actually grappling with. And then everybody knows that Lincoln was assassinated, but I didn't know myself exactly when and exactly why.
Mm.
And so April of 1865, the Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant to end the Civil War, to surrender, formally surrender on a Sunday. That Tuesday, Lincoln gave a speech outside of the White House, in the portico of the White House, talking about limited voting rights for African Americans in Louisiana. John Wilkes Booth was in the audience, heard this speech, turns to the person next to him and says, "That means N-word citizenship. That is the last speech he will ever give." This was the Tuesday, 2 days after the surrender. That Friday, Wilkes Booth snuck into the Ford Theater, went upstairs and shot Lincoln in the back of the head. That is not surrendering. That is continuing the Civil War. John Wilkes Booth had actually written, very clear, unapologetic white supremacist letters and laying out his philosophy around what he thought was going on in the world. So really, from the very week that the South supposedly surrendered, the Confederates have continued to fight. And then you fast forward up to 1876, we had a decade of Reconstruction, which was enacted over great opposition, right? The 13th Amendment, you have passed 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, 13th outlawing slavery, 14th saying you have rights within the states, 15th the right to vote. 13th Amendment could not pass the House of Representatives, even in a Congress that didn't even have any Southerners. And they had to have multiple votes and revisions of it to finally get that out of the House. So even that basic voting rights piece was, the basic citizenship piece was resisted. And so it was a decade of progress, but also great resistance. And then you come to 1876, where the election was, in the current book, I talk about how I feel like this election is akin to 1876. Are we going to continue on the path, or trying to build a multiracial democracy, or are we going to basically hand the country back to those who want this to fundamentally be a white country? And that existential question, is this a multiracial democracy, or is this fundamentally a white country, remains the battle. And so the 1876 election was very closely fought. And then the South conceded the election with an eye towards the long game. It says, we will give up the White House if you give back the South to white people. Hold the troops out, Compromise of 1877, handed the South back to the slave owners, who for nearly 100 years ran legalized white supremacy in the South. There's legalized segregation and all of that, Jim Crow, et cetera, all the way up to 1965. So this concept and this reality that we are still fighting this existential battle over what is the nature of this country is what I try to lay out in the first half of this book, taking it all the way up to the current day. And I try to illustrate how it's not any accident that the 45th president followed the first Black president. And
Right.
I'd heard a document that the Department of Homeland Security, so the rise of white nationalism that came with the ascendance of Barack Obama within this country. So that's the first half of the book. And then the second half is this issue on how do we actually win? And there are multiple, and actually somebody had asked me, like, what was I most excited about the book? And I thought about it, and I was like, my whole adult life, people of color and racial justice champions, and we would always say we have to, organize and mobilize. We've been told by mainstream progressive and liberal allies, well, yes, that racial justice stuff is important, but we have to win. So we have to put the racial justice arguments on the back burner and mute our voices, et cetera. And then I was like, wait a minute, we're winning. We won in Georgia. We won in Virginia. We've won in Harris County, Texas. We've won in Arizona. We've won in San Diego. And all of those places have had common elements, what I call a liberation battle plan. And so the second half of the book is laying out how, with strong leaders, strong civic engagement organizations, disciplined, data-driven plans, and playing the long game, Each of those places has been transformed over the course of the past decade. And that is the essence of how we win. And that lays out a roadmap for where we go from here. And then I conclude in the epilogue talking about calling for really unleashing our highest values and visions and our dreams. That what is the society we want to live in? What would the society look like if we did not, if the social contract was not a series of compromises with white supremacists, which is in essence what even the Constitution itself, right? So the Declaration of Independence itself, Thomas Jefferson wrote a condemnation of the slave trade in the Declaration of Independence, and the Southerners made him take it out. The 3/5 of a human being in the Constitution, the fugitive slave clause in the Constitution. So what would society look like if we were able to simply say, what do we think society should look like? This beloved community concept. I talk about universal basic income, that there's so many different aspects of what we could have. And you can't even call it a benefit, but the reality from the level of destruction of the social contract that we have been witnessing over these past few years, most prominently on January 6th, where the democratic process played itself out. 50 governors, Republican and Democrat alike, signed off on the election, and that was assaulted and trampled and really destroyed, is we no longer need to be constrained by what those compromises were and can let our imaginations run wild. And I also try to tie all that together in that we actually have the numbers in terms of this new American majority of people of color and progressive whites to enact policies and a societal vision that fully manifest our highest ideals and our biggest dreams. And that's what I try to encourage us to look towards as I wrap the book.
Thank you for that, Steve. And Unitarian Universalists, this is the sermon that we've been doing in the Texas UU Justice Ministry. What would our country look like 1,000 elections from now if we were getting every voter to the polls, if we were, if our policies were chosen by every single person, the way Unitarian Universalism says there is inherent worth and dignity in every person. So if our elections reflected that. So I want to thank you, Steve. And we've been also talking a lot about this question of our imagination. Adrienne Marie Brown talks about this. A lot of the Black womanist theologians that we're drawing from talk about this. So everyone on this call, I want you to be listening to Steve, but also thinking about that vision that you have. And if you get a moment of inspiration that you want to put in the chat of what is the world that you really dream about, we want to hear it from you. Thank you for all of that invitation. You mentioned Harris County, and we've got some Harris County folks in here. I would be curious to know both, whether you want to dig in on Harris County a little bit and or speak to the state. Yes, we love Texas. We know Texas has a lot of potential, but you could have chosen another state to get its own chapter in the book. Why really Texas, and why in particular? There's some good stuff in here about Harris County if you'd like to dig into that a little bit.
Right. So as I was saying up top, I was, privileged and honored to work with and partner with Stacey Abrams over the past decade, and saw from the beginning, and that really goes back to my experience with the Rainbow Coalition, when Jesse Jackson had the conception that if you register people of color to vote, it changes the composition of the electorate and makes much more possible. Ran on an unapologetic social justice platform, and won several Southern states in the primaries, which is kind of lost to history at a certain point. So I've seen that play itself out. And then you look to Texas, where the demographic revolution is even more profound. Well, demographic revolutions suggest that it was once one thing has moved towards another, right? It's important to realize, remember, and I talk about this in the chapter, that Texas was part of Mexico. And the whole creation of Texas came about because Mexico said you can't hold slaves. And Texas says, no, we want to hold slaves. We're going to go to war with you. So that's an important part, I think, of history to realize. But fundamentally, in terms of the dynamics of the coalition, the Obama coalition, the New American Majority, the overwhelming majority of people of color allied with progressive whites being the essence of that formula, the numbers are they're more favorable in Texas even than they were in Georgia. And we've seen what happened in Georgia in terms of being able, again, to change that state, and the change in that state changed the country. And so Texas is 40.2%, it's 60.2% people of color. The conception of Texas is that it's white guys with cowboy hats, right? And so
You know better here.
Yeah, right. So that's what people think of in terms of the
Right.
electorate and who it is. Now, I'll tell somebody it's far more Beyonce and Megan Thee Stallion than it is the white guys in the cowboy hats.
Amen.
And so that then becomes a question around voting. And so the underlying numbers are there. And so then can you do the work, invest in the groups, invest in the leaders who can bring the population majority, make it a voting majority? And then you look at places like Harris County and also in Dallas as well. And there are several other counties as well, but particularly where you've seen the results in places like Harris, which what used to be far more conservative, and but they have seen transformation as the composition of the electorate has changed. And so that proves the theory of the case, that if you do the work, find the leaders, back to groups, to do the work to bring out the voters and change who actually is within the voting population, you can change who the governing people are, and what their policies and what their priorities and what their direction is. And so what has happened in Harris can happen in several other counties, which is the other reality of Texas people don't really realize, is that certainly to the people of color, most people of color only live in about 8 to 10 counties within Texas. Now there's like, what, 200 or something like that. But if you can focus on those counties and be able to transform them by doing the work there, that will change the whole state of Texas. So the numbers are there, and then the theory of the case has been proven in Harris and in other counties. And then so that shows the path over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. If you do that work to change these other counties, which will then change the whole state, and I do believe that will change the whole country.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions pretty soon from all of these great folks that we have here. But you mentioned your faith background. And so I wanted to ask you about the role of the faith community, particularly progressive faith organizing, especially as we face extremist, white supremacist Christian nationalism. What do you see as our role, and what advice do you have for us as progressive faith organizers here in Texas or around the country, since we have lots of folks here from around the country?
Yeah, I would say 2 or 3 things. And one is that it's kind of remarkable how much, like you're saying, the white nationalist Christians have, and they're really the kind of the conservatives and the right wing in general have stolen the faith mantle, right? That the civil rights movement in particular was championed and led by the faith community. And so you have that reality. And within that reality, I think there's like kind of 2 particular, right? So part of it is the values and the vision. What is the society that we want to have? And what are the values on which we actually proceed? And so there's nobody better to be able to articulate that than people from the faith community around how should a society, what are the values that undergird our society? Do we care about each other? I remember seeing a sign, this was way back when I was in college. It says, do we fear our enemies more than we love our children? Right. And so injecting that framing into the public policy conversation is something that's missing. Is that we really we're not driven by our highest and best values and aspirations when we really can. Partly because people do this political calculus, like, well, that's all fine, but we have to, go deal with these other numbers. People underestimate the extent to which there is an appetite for far-reaching change and for justice and for equality. So holding and articulating the full vision of what a society based upon our best values is a critical role that the faith community has to play. And then the other part is just this fundamental piece, the fundamental reality. I was talking to somebody the other day, that's somebody who's part of the faith community, and they were talking about, should we organize a general strike within Texas to get people's attention? And I was like, Texas needs a general strike. Texas needs everybody to vote. And that will be revolutionary and will actually transform Texas. So there's multiple different dimensions to that. But one thing in particular, which I've been, often, been along a champion of, is why don't we do the work and try to get people to invest in making sure that every single person who belongs to a faith-based institution is registered to vote, and that every single person, or as many as certainly possible, it does actually vote. Right? We did work in Ohio back in 2008 on the in that election, and there was this whole, there's been in other places as well, this whole souls to the polls piece. But what they did in Ohio was that there were buses which would pull up to churches as church ended. People would leave church, get on the buses, and go to the registrar board of elections to vote. And so there's a structure in place in terms of much of the faith community that can be drawn upon to be able to maximize voter registration and voter turnout. And that is going to be the revolutionary transformation key within Texas, is getting as many people who are eligible to vote and getting the electorate to reflect the population.
Well, and that actually brings me to the question that our congregational and justice organizer, Michelle Venegas-Matula, who attended your talk with UUSJ, and I want to give her credit for so strongly recommending having you here. She sent this question in advance and goes with with what you're saying. She writes, with Texas legislature working overtime to create barriers and reduce access to voting, and with very real voter disenfranchisement and disenchantment due to the feeling like their vote doesn't matter, what could we be doing better to get the vote out without dismissing that the disenfranchised and the disenchanted? What are Texas organizers missing in terms of what we could be doing or focusing on?
Well, I think there's a combination of I don't know how to put it, but in terms of those, like, the mechanics of voter engagement, and then there's the kind of the chemistry or the spirit part of it. And so we don't have enough. It's not just on the faith community, it's on the overall social change community, in terms of inspiring people and being able to give them, like you're saying, give them a reason to vote. Now, there are places there this is happening, like I feature in the book Texas Organizing Project and their work, and they were focused in Bexar County and other places on the district attorney races. And actually, I talk about the Harris County district attorney race. That's partly because, or largely because, the community's experience negative experiences with the criminal justice system. And so you can make a more direct connection that people understand, that anybody who's been arrested or who's had to come in contact with the system, who's had charges brought against them. Well, the district attorney does that. We're going to change the district attorney. So that's one aspect. And then there's also, to the extent that we can lift up and promote public policies in terms of things like universal basic income, ending poverty, right? Can you get a slate of people to agree to run on a platform that we're going to actually try to champion the ending of poverty? So that's another aspect, I think, which could be more inspirational to people, beyond the kind of way sometimes it's talked about. It's like, yeah, none of the candidates are any good, but it's the lesser of two evils, and so it's still important for you to go out, rather than, no, here's this thing we really want, and if you participate and vote and tell your friends and neighbors, we can actually have better things within our community, within our society.
Absolutely. And Texas UUs, you can read more about Texas Organizing Project in Steve's book, but you can also be hearing from these folks when you come to our events. Just at our annual gathering in Dallas, we had one of our friends from the Texas Organizing Project as one of our speakers. So we do our annual gatherings so that you can hear from these people who are on the front lines doing this really important work and get inspired and learn from them. So I put that plug in for those gatherings. But Steve, I'm going to go to the questions just in order from our folks. The first one that I have here that my team's put down is from Ken and Chris. It says, we have a majority overall in the US. Do you believe we also have the majority in enough states to win the Electoral College? Basically, what about the 7 swing states?
Yeah, so that's the whole point of my whole first book, is trying to quantify. And one of the things I talk about in that book is how we have a new American majority, and it's growing every day, right? And so let's see if I can even find that chart that I did. And so there is, oh, this is it. Let's see if this will show up actually. So this is a chart I had in my first book that has the daily growth in this population of people of color is the daily growth of whites. Every single day, 7,000 new people of color added to populations compared to whites. It's a combination of births, deaths, and legal immigration. The majority of people under 18 are people of color. And then a good chunk of the whites under 18 are relatively progressive. So all the trends are in our direction, are in the right direction. Something I didn't even fully appreciate is that, with the exception of the 2004 presidential election, and the presidential elections are the closest thing we have to a referendum on the country in terms of what the values are, what the composition of the country is. The Democrat has won the popular vote in every single presidential election since 1992, with that one exception of 2004. Trump did not win the popular vote in 2016. Bush did not win the popular vote in 2000. So I say all that to say that the short answer is yes, that we have enough. And even that's one of the things I was saying in 2022, that everyone was talking about, oh, there's going to be this red wave and the Republicans are going to dominate within the House. And I was like, well, why? Because we ran the numbers. Joe Biden won the most votes in 226 of the congressional districts. It takes 218 to have the majority. So almost like however you cut it, which is why there's so much obsession with voter suppression, is because the right wing knows that they are a minority party. And so they have to stop people from voting. So the short answer to that question is yes, there are enough votes in all of the states, including the swing states. And what I've tried to lay out in the book, which is even more encouraging, is that as of 2016, Georgia and Arizona were not seen as swing states, but they actually voted for Biden in 2020, and now they are seen as swing states. That trend is continuing. North Carolina, even Florida, people should not be giving up on Florida in terms of risk composition. So the trend is and then ultimately Texas, which is really going to change the whole thing. So that's a very long way of saying the short answer is yes, is that we do have the majority in enough states to win the electoral college, as well as in these swing states.
Well, thank you for the good news, as we say in the church. We need the good news, but I will just lift up in this moment for our UUs and TXUUJM members. Our organization is nonpartisan, and our overall work is to get everybody out to vote, no matter party. But my colleague, Reverend Nell Newton, asks a relevant question given what we're talking about. She asked, what can we say to our young adults who are so disgusted by the compromises and failure of nerve of the Democratic Party, parentheses, to appease whites, that they are unwilling to vote? They feel it would make them complicit.
So I was talking to a friend of mine, and who was talking to her daughter, who's 22-year-old African-American. And the 22-year-old was saying that she was not gonna vote, didn't make a difference, and didn't see any difference between the candidates. And so my friend was and they went to the Heritage Foundation website, which has this whole Project 2025 agenda that they've begun to lay out in terms of what will the agenda be like if the conservatives take control of the federal government, and the level of aggressively and unapologetically trying to make America white again, which is what I titled my Trump chapter. And they're not making any bones about it. Mass deportations, a whole, we already seen the Supreme Court, the attacks on women's reproductive freedom, etc. It's a cataclysmic vision of what we are going to be facing if those who are the enemies of multiracial democracy take control of the government. And so that has to be impressed upon young people. This is not a question around, are you enthusiastic about the individual who's actually running for office? And it's about, what is the country you want to see? And do you want to go backwards? And something, the other piece of the piece I would add to that is that get involved in terms of yourself. Don't just feel that, oh, those people, they're the ones who are in charge, et cetera. I ran for office and was elected to the school board. I was 28 years old. And so we've got, members of Congress now who've, been elected at in their late 20s. And so that's the flip side, is take responsibility. So yes, there's a lot to be dissatisfied with, and we're very far from the ultimate society we want, but it's not a solution to opt out. It's a solution to step up and take responsibility to try to, and then I was actually telling somebody else today. So my niece is in Tennessee, and she's a young African-American woman. She ran the campaign of her friend who's a young lawyer, Khadijah Babb, who ousted a sitting judge in Nashville, elected Khadijah as the youngest Black woman to hold office in Davidson County. And that's an example of what's possible. So the sentiment is understandable. The solution to not participate is not. I think that's where we should be pushing back on people.
Thank you. Texas UUs, I want to say, I remember when our Unitarian Universalist state representative, Donna Howard, when I was growing up, was, I hate to say just, but was another mom in church. And then she ran for school board in conservative Westlake. And I don't remember if she won the first time or not, but you start somewhere, and she's a very important member of our State House of Representatives. And so I just share that with you. I remember being in awe that she was on the school board and in Westlake of all places, and then that she made it to the House. And I look forward to being in awe of some people on this call when you choose to step up or move forward, as Steve was describing.
Just on that real quick, there's
yes.
Also one thing, there's more possibility people actually realize in local office, right? So when I
Absolutely.
ran, we knocked on 12,000 doors, and I was saying we defeated more established people. But one of the realities is that many of these elections at the local level are in off years. So there's only like 5,000 people vote in each district, or that's the number you need to win in a district for Dallas City Council. And that's an organizable number. You can knock on 5,000 doors. We knocked on 12,000 doors. And so it's more possible to actually minimally have an impact, let alone win some local elections, than people may appreciate.
Absolutely. And that's the message we're getting from our speakers all the time, is these hyper local campaigns. There's people on this call right now who are incredibly powerful organizers at the county and local level. We see the work that they're doing. And I hope some of you who are doing that work will share some of your questions in the chat as well. And this is sort of a good news, bad news thing, but you may have seen, Steve, Harris County's Senate race just Dale, last week or the week before, was decided by 70-something votes. I don't know if they're doing a recount. There's just too many headlines to keep up with. But anyway, it's like the good news is your vote really, really, really matters, even in a Harris County, Texas Senate race. The bad news is like it was that close. So, we need to get people out there. This next question is from One of our Texas UU Justice Ministry Advisory Council members, Lindy Dower. Thank you, Lindy, for all that you do on our advisory council. Lindy says, I'm curious about, quote, ending white supremacy, quote, when so many of us have white supremacy culture ingrained in us. Do you think that can happen without white people? And I imagine you mean, Lindy, like a critical mass of white people doing the inner work to realize our privilege so we can work for equity.
Well, I don't think these things are either or. And so, yes, all of that has to take place, and yet it's not sequential, right? And so one of the things people don't appreciate is that, and from a voting standpoint, if you could use the presidential elections as a barometer of the sentiments of individuals and of the population, in terms of and again, just in terms of the partisan piece, but if you just use it as a barometer, the Democrats got the most votes from whites when they challenged the country to elect a black man president. And so then that happened, and then you had a public policy agenda unfold in terms of providing health care to people of all different backgrounds, et cetera. And so and then what I call for in the book and is really, so it's not, there's the internal work and there's the external action. And so is to really be able to find back and invest in the leaders, the social change leaders, most of whom are actually people of color, and elevate them to do the work within the communities to win these actual elections. That doesn't mean don't do the inner work, but that while that's going on, you can still be championing and lifting up and investing and moving resources to people like Michelle Tremere, who runs Texas Organizing Project, and Breonna Brown, who runs it with her. So they're not either or. And I think that we've seen that we can actually make progress. And while we're making that progress, we should also be doing the internal work as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, folks, we have about 15 more minutes for questions from you. And I've got a couple more questions that are on my list. So this is your chance to be thinking up a little bit more if you've got it. Steve, our next question says, and I'm not sure who it came from, so if this sounds like your question, you can maybe wave in the chat so I can acknowledge you. But it says, UUs are very focused this year on A, the election, B, the UU climate justice revival. What does your research, Steve, and message offer to connect those two things, the election and climate justice? How do we connect them, given your observations and research?
Well, it's an important part of what are the issues that we talk about within an election, right? And some of the people bearing the greatest brunt of the, climate change and climate catastrophes are the communities of color, right? And actually, there's a lot of work happening now in Texas around the whole power grid failure. You've got these natural disasters that have been happening, and then who is bearing the brunt of that? And then it's another way in terms of explaining the relevance and significance of the elections and of who actually is in power and who actually is in government, is how responsive is government and to whom are they responsive? And so some of these issues regarding these natural disasters and the power grid and things like that are ways that you can make some of these electoral issues more tangible to people in that regard. So I think that's kind of the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me in that regard.
Thank you. And something that was brought up recently, and I forget in which TXUUJM conversation, but was that, as people with money are able to buy their own generators, we become less and less invested in solving the overall grid crisis in focusing on climate justice. So I just share for anyone who has been able to afford and buy a generator, every time you pass by that generator, think about recommitting to making sure that everyone has that power as well. This question is from Sharon Welch. And Sharon, I'm so happy that you're here. Sharon says, given the dissatisfaction with Biden by people of color and progressive whites on many issues, how do we frame votes for this November election. The Poor People's Campaign, one of our partners, message of our vote is a demand, not support, or other ideas you might share. And I know you spoke about this a little bit, but if you have more you'd like to add.
Yeah, well, I do. We're actually thinking, so I do this Democracy in Color podcast, and so we're actually looking at doing a whole series in the fall around this whole project 2025. So just in terms of where we're actually at, the reality of it, right, is that Donald Trump never planned to be president. He never, frankly, even wanted to be president. He wanted to be famous, and that's why he ran for president. And he's even said in 2015, he says, "Well, I'll just go back to being Trump, but bigger if I lose." And nobody in the entire country, including anybody in Trump's team, thought they were going to win. And they were not prepared. Say all that to say they were not prepared to govern, and they were not prepared to advance their agenda. I think that those of us who are concerned about the destruction they tried to do should be mindful of that. That they didn't have a detailed plan. They didn't know which components of the government they were going to try to dismantle and how they were going to try to work the levers of power to be able to roll back progress towards multiracial democracy. They're ready now. And so they are very ready and very prepared and very meticulous around what they are going to try to do aggressively with all of the levers of the federal government to roll back all of these efforts towards making this a multicultural, multiracial society. And the Heritage Foundation lays it out in their Project 2025. The Nation magazine has done a whole series around this whole Project 2025. So this election is not about Joe Biden. This election is not about, do you like Joe Biden? Although I will say there's been a lot more progress towards justice and equality and climate and many of the things that we care about under this administration than people realize. And there's been a lot more improvement in the economy than people actually give them credit for. So but it's fundamentally, this election is not a referendum around Joe Biden or how enthusiastic or excited they are about him. It's a referendum on what kind of country do we want? And that that choice is quite stark. And people are not making any apologies or trying to hide what they are going to try to do. And so that is what I think we need to be focusing people on. Somebody was saying that like elections, it's like a candidacy is like well, people don't even catch the bus anymore, but it's like catching this, like, it's not whether you're enthusiastic about the personality of the bus driver, is this bus going to move you towards your destination or not? And I think we get far too caught up in our emotions about the candidates. And then the last thing I would just say is I would not I'm working on a piece around these polls, all these polls showing that, Biden's behind, et cetera, how much support. These are polls by people who do not understand Black people and people of color. And that's what the fundamental conclusion, that Biden gets 88% of the Black vote in 2020. 80% of Black folks voted for reproductive rights in Ohio just this past November. No Democratic nominee has ever gotten less than 82% of the vote since 1976. These New York Times polls have Biden's Black support at 58%. It will be historically revolutionary. How could this fall 30%? They're conflating lack of enthusiasm and with the decision that they're not going to vote for him, and they're defying all of the electoral history and the data points and whatnot. So I just say all that to say that I wouldn't overly obsess. Need to do the work to make sure people vote, and then make sure people are clear what the choice is. And that, to me, is what the challenge is of progressive-minded people in 2024.
Thank you. I have two more questions, but I want to just pause because you've had a lot of really important things to share, and I know everyone's taking it in, and just give those folks who need a little bit of quiet processing time to think for a moment if there's a question that they've been trying to put words to. So Steve, do you mind if I just give folks about 30 seconds of silence?
Sure.
To think?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for everything you've been sharing with us. I know we're going to be chewing on it for a good while. Our next question comes from another TXUUJM Advisory Council member in Georgetown, Texas, just north of Austin, Lou Sneed. Thank you, Lou, for all you do. Lou has read the book and says, in the epilogue of your book, you suggest creating a new social contract, presumably when we gain dominant political power. How critical do you think that articulating a social contract to promote the common good is now in order to challenge the ideology of fear, resentment, and institutional distrust that conservatives are campaigning on?
I think it's critical, and I think that it is a tactical error I think people don't make. And I think you see it happening like with this whole issue around DEI. This is the whole issue in Texas aggressively, right? In terms of DEI and all these attacks on the Supreme Court saying, oh, you can't do anything DEI, it's discriminatory. DEI is a remedy. It's one remedy to a problem of ongoing, centuries-long systemic racism and inequality. So the issue is not DEI, the issue is what are we doing to address that fundamental inequality? So I say that to say, I feel it's actually critical that we get aggressive around returning to the original vision in this regard. So this is the lifting up an alternative and a more inclusive and progressive vision around the kind of society that we want to have. So and I feel there's too much defensiveness about, well, DEI doesn't do this, or we have to fall back or change our language. We have to go back to calling out and summoning people to. We have a gargantuan racial wealth gap within this country that came about because people were brought here in chains to make the country wealthy and could not participate in that. What are we doing about that? What level of responsibility do we have for it? We have the ongoing legacy and the ongoing manifestations of it, and any kind of moral society would prioritize and tackle that. And what I've also tried to articulate is that I strongly believe, and I believe the numbers bear out, that's also a winning message. And so to this point around combating, I think it's essential because so much of the debate is being pulled to the right that somebody has to push it back to, which is why I like the universal basic income piece, in terms of, no, we shouldn't have poverty at all. And let's have that be the public policy conversation. So I absolutely believe we have to be bold, unapologetic, and lead with our highest dreams and biggest hopes.
Okay, folks, I want to emphasize that. Bold, unapologetic, leading with our highest dreams and deepest hopes. Is that what I heard, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. I hope someone's taking notes because I'm focused on you and what you're saying, but those were important words for us to hold on to. And I'm glad that we're recording as well. Thank you. Ann Gilmore's question. And I know this is on a lot of our hearts and minds here in Texas. Our congregations have been working hard on gun violence prevention and related issues. So Ann says, as someone committed to nonviolent direct action, I worry that the white supremacists have most of the weapons and are willing to use them to advance their agenda, or maybe are apt to use them to advance their agenda. Does that concern you as well? I imagine, well, I'll let you, it's a yes or no question, but you may have more to say than yes or no.
Well, it concerns me, but I feel like this particular year that you like, the whole preface to the book is about how this is like 1876. Are we going towards multiracial democracy? Are we going back towards making this country white again? And we saw what happened after the last election in terms of division and, et cetera. I am glad that Joe Biden is the commander-in-chief. That in terms of the actual power and the array of being able to enforce and protect a multiracial democracy. Yes, many of the white supremacists have weapons. They don't have many as the government does. And so Joe Biden is the commander-in-chief of this country.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have had two more questions added in, and I'm going to go ahead and ask them, I think. And then we're going to move into a time on our agenda. I'm just peeking. where we're going to talk about what kind of actions should we be taking. And we're going to welcome you, Steve, for some final thoughts, but I'll ask these last couple of questions that people have submitted. Thank you so much for all of this and for doing this in conversation with us. Our people always have a lot that they want to ask, and I'm so glad you were excited to do it this way. Thank you. Okay, I think we have an anonymous question, which is also fine, I think. It says, keeping in mind that people of color are not a monolith and that we, the Texas UU Justice Ministry, are an issue-based organization, what are you seeing as the main issues that folks are concerned about that we can talk about to help move folks to the polls this election cycle?
Well, as I've been saying, I think, and I do think that the president has been doing some of this in some of his speeches about calling out the extremism and the threats from the white nationalists within the country. Is that if you accept the premise, as I'm trying to lay out in the entire book, that the Confederates, the people who want this to fundamentally be a white country, have never stopped fighting and still are aggressively fighting to make it so, that then this becomes an existential election. And so this is the example of the 22-year-old that I was talking about, is, are we going to have a country that is primarily about straight white men and their, rights and comfort take primacy, and everybody else is pushed to the side? Or are we going to have a multiracial democracy where everybody's concerns are validated and addressed and focused on? So I do think that existential question should be the defining feature of this 2024 election. And I don't think people have that. And I worry too many people on the progressive side default too much to. I was on a radio program the other day. I talked about kitchen table issues and economics and gas prices and all of that. And so I thought we should ignore that, but that's a whole different question than what kind of country is this going to be? And it's a very stark choice. And I worry that if we don't continue to accentuate just how stark it is, then you can get into this normalization and, oh, well, this person has, this approach and this, and it's all, you kind of weighing it out, rather than, do we want to live in a straight white male Christian nationalist country, or do we want to live in a multiracial democracy? That's the issue. And that, I feel, when it's clear, as it was for the 22-year-old, once they got clear on it, it's like, oh, okay, if that's the choice, then yeah, I'll vote, and I'll vote to move in the direction I want to go in.
Absolutely. And Texas UUs, I hope you hear that as a call to you. That's faith work for us to do to help people understand that existential, issue that we're facing, that starkness, that question of our faith in democracy and the country that we want to live in. That's our work to do. And with that sort of faith focus, I'll go to our last question from our participants from TXUUJM's very hardworking board chair, Bruce Harris in Dallas. Thank you, Bruce, for your question, which is, has there been enough collaboration between the, quote, white liberal and POC, people of color faith communities? And if not, how can that be improved in your view?
Well, I think that's, some of that particular piece of the question within the state and within the POC faith communities in Texas. I will say that both on that question as well as in terms of the path forward, that the leaders and the groups who are doing the work of civic engagement and voter mobilization in the communities of color need to be championed and promoted and elevated. And you often see that that's not the case in terms of who gets quoted and who gets invited to conferences and who gets the grants and things like that. And so everybody can become a champion of a leader of color doing the work in the communities of color to get people registered and participating in our society and in our government. And I think that is the intervention and I think the role that I think particularly white liberals can play. Because it's kind of this, also one of this like cocktail party chatter. You talk about like, oh, you heard of so-and-so, they're brilliant. That's too frequently, it's a white person when that gets mentioned. rather than if you heard of this person of color who's doing this civic engagement work, and we need to all get behind them and tell other people about them, et cetera. That I feel is a critical component of advancing the work going forward.
Well, that segues perfectly into these action items for folks. What other just kind of clear things we can do? I'm hearing Steve say we can pass the mic, we can talk about leaders of color and amplify and support them in our communities. What other things, Steve, would you like folks to go away committing that they're going to do? Yeah,
so this has come up in a lot of situations. And so I actually have tried to distill it down for people, is that I do feel that there are, because there's three things like that everybody can do, every individual can do. And so one is make a list. And it's like of your own, friends, family, people who have some respect for your opinions and your everyone's very busy and there's lots of information. It's hard to stay on top of everything. And so people will appreciate you come on distilling the information that you actually need to know. So who's on that list? The list could be 10 people, it could be 100 people. It's making the list. Then is what I was saying is about basically adopting an organization. Find a civic engagement organization and a leader and become their champion. And so subscribe to their list, make small dollar contributions to them, but follow them, see what they're doing, see what their work is, what things they're actually trying to move forward, become an expert around that group's work. And so that's the second thing. And then the third would be to communicate that information back to your list. And so let your list know that the people in this organization, they're doing a voter drive this coming week, or they could use this kind of support in this regard. And so that's what, and this kind of where the media world is going now with like Substack newsletters and all this kind of thing. It's like almost making your own little newsletter for your circle of people and using that as a platform to elevate the leaders who are doing the civic engagement work. That's going to be critical to transforming the state.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll say we've got, I've got a Zumba group. People know that I dance. And there is one person in that text thread who not an election will go by that she isn't reminding that group, which never gets political to speak of, but she is on there making sure that people are aware of the election. She's got information for everybody, and just like being that person, right, among other things. We all appreciate that about her. And I think, folks, you'll be surprised who appreciates you as you do some of these things that Steve is inviting you to commit to doing. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to go back and just rewatch this from a listener's perspective and beyond being a in conversation perspective. You've shared so much with us, Steve. Thank you so much. Is there a question that you wish we had asked that you'd like to address, or just some closing thoughts before we go to some announcements?
Well, I don't think there's a question, but I've been doing a lot of traveling in the past, couple of months and whatnot. So I think I want to leave people with the confidence that while we are engaged in this existential struggle, and it's an intense one and the consequences are enormous, those who want this to be a multiracial democracy are the majority. And so we are, in fact, the majority, and we should prevail, and we should be able to prevail if we do the work of making sure that our majority manifests and participates and shows up. And you can read the, polls in the New York Times or read this, and there's a lot of angst and dread that people are feeling that is not empirically supported. And so I would just leave you with the confidence that we have the numbers to both fight off the white nationalist attacks this year and to build and create the society going forward. And so to be confident in that and to carry ourselves with that confidence, and that if we do the work that's necessary, we will in fact prevail. I have seen it. I saw it over the past decade transpire in Georgia. I was there in 2012, 2014, 2016. So all the doubt, all the naysaying, all the reluctance to actually believe, and yet saw the building blocks to get there. That is possible, and not even possible. It's even in some ways more possible in Texas than it even was in Georgia in terms of the underlying composition. So that's my final message, is that we are the majority, and the majority is trending in our direction every single day, and we should carry ourselves with that confidence and try to transmit that to those people within our circle and in our orbit.
Thank you. Did everybody take that in? For those of us who were at the Reproductive Justice Conference Sacred in New Orleans just a few weeks ago, that was also the theme. It shall be. We repeated that over and over again as leaders of color in the reproductive justice movement called us to. It shall be. And so I believe it, and I appreciate you, Steve, for bringing that message to us again. In that spirit of having the numbers, some of the folks on this call were also there at the Texas Capitol for the hearing about the DEI ban in Texas, and they were 100% of the speakers in that hearing, of which many of them were members of this organization, speaking against that ban. And so we know that we have the numbers when we mobilize and show up. And in that spirit, I'd like to invite TXUUJM's Congregational and Justice Organizer, Michelle Venegas Matula, to come on camera and give us just a little bit about the actions that are ahead. We will also have some time to check out, so don't leave us yet, friends. I have some questions for you before we go. Michelle, thank you for all the work you do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve, for that message of hope and determination. And in that spirit, wanted to bring up an action that's that's happening on Tuesday, June 11th at 10 a.m. The Texas Senate Committee on Border Security is meeting to have invited testimony as well as public testimony. And they're reviewing the state and local agencies' participation in border security and kind of seeing, like, how did all these laws that they just passed and Operation Lone Star, how is it going? And yet, this is happening at the Capitol, where those most affected, those that live on the border, who are migrant siblings, as well as those that are, do not see the border in the same way that our government is making it out to be. They are not having the opportunity to come and speak, because it would take so long. It would take so many resources to be able to come up and be able to testify. So what we're doing is collecting testimony from those folks, and we're asking our UUs and friends to show up and read this testimony so that they can be heard, even though they cannot be there in person. So this is a great opportunity to use our power, our privilege, and our resources to be in solidarity with our border community siblings. Also those that have experience with the border, that have maybe taken a border witness trip, or have family or friends so that they know that the militarization of what's happening at the border is not the reality. The government keeps saying that all these criminals are coming through, and what we know is that it is families and asylum seekers and refugees due to many different issues. That's really the truth of what's happening. And so we want to amplify those messages on Tuesday. So we just ask for as many folks to show up as possible, and I'll have those testimonies printed out and a photo of the people that these words are from, that you can hold up while you read the testimony. And we can use any type of support that you may be able to give us during that time. If you can only show up and drop off some snacks, that would be great too. Just do whatever little bit that we can to help amplify our siblings' voice.
Thank you, Michelle. And please, folks, check your email and reach out to Michelle to let her know that you're coming so she can organize with you. And I see our intern minister, soon to be Faith and Democracy organizer in the fall, Sarah Burrell-Harrop, on camera, who's been supporting from behind the scenes. Sarah, did you want to say a quick word about our democracy work?
Okay. I'm trying to do tech stuff at the same time.
No pressure. I just saw
so-
your face. You can say no. All things by consent, my friend.
No, it's all good. So I'm really excited about our plans for the next year. I think that we have an important role to play as a faith community in really bringing forward our issues and the importance of engagement and our faith that if folks will enter into the democratic process, and that we can move in solidarity with them, whatever happens with this election. That this is really our call, and I just invite y'all to sign up for our newsletters so that you can see we've got really big plans. September 2nd, we will be the national UU the Vote National Phone Bank will be a Texas phone bank, and we will have phone banking every week after that. So we will have ample opportunities for y'all to get involved, whether you live in Texas, if you don't live in Texas. You know, we give you a big Texas welcome to come and be with us in the struggle, because we can beat back the Christian nationalism. We can beat back the white supremacy agenda. We gotta get together to do that.
Thank you, Sarah. And a couple more announcements for you before I have questions for you for the checkout. Please make sure that you have June 25th on your calendar for 7 p.m. Central on Zoom as we celebrate Sarah Burrell-Harrop's wonderfully successful, important, and impactful 2 years of intern ministry with us at TXUUJM. Please register and plan to join us in celebration. Please keep an eye on your emails. You know, I talk about the spiritual practice of reading your emails. Please do that. This is a very important time, and we have a lot of calls to action for you. I also want to encourage you to look for Steve's books, please. I don't have a lot of time that I would like to have for reading, and this was so compelling, so readable, even as it is so full of research and information and stories. I highly recommend it. You will get hope for Texas and for the nation with this book. And we want to support the labor of our artists, of our writers. So I encourage you, Michelle's got hers, I encourage you to do that. And I will tell you that your scrappy Texas UU Justice Ministry also needs your support. This was a free event. And the work that we do to make it look like, you know, 100 people can come and do this thing, it takes a lot. So I would like to also invite you to make your donation to us and to the Black-led faith organizing of your choice in your community, and support the folks that are out there doing the work, please, and do it tonight while you're feeling inspired. Get the book and make a contribution tonight. All right. With that, I have checkout questions for you and a chalice extinguishing prayer for you. But I just want to check in with you, Steve, one more time. Anything else you'd like to lift up before we wrap it up?
No, I think we covered it all.
Okay, thank you so much for being with us. Pablo DeJesús from UUSJ, thank you for being with us. The entire Texas UU Justice Ministry Action Hour team, which has been holding this Thursday night action space every week for about 2 years. Thank you for your service to action, to democracy. I want to invite you all to connect with your ancestors, your sense of the divine, as we hold a word of prayer and extinguishing our chalice together. May we have the confidence that Steve talked about in this existential struggle, May we feel the spirit of life and love, our God of many names, all languages, and no man-made borders, by our side while we remember that we are the majority. And feel that as we show up, knowing that we have numbers, we have data, we have confidence. If we do the work, we will prevail, as Steve said, because Steve has seen it, we have seen it. Every single one of you has seen it. And so I want you to take away tonight a memory of one of the times that you have seen it, and know that we can be part of that next thing that inspires the next group of people towards this multiracial democracy, this beloved community that we know can be. A breath, maybe another. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here together and for all that we have learned, the recommitments that we come away with, the actions we know we will take in community. For those who are still here, I invite you to put in the chat, as Sarah plays our closing music, what is giving you hope, or what next action do you commit to taking? And on behalf of the whole TXUUJM Justice Ministry, our partners, and those who are directly impacted by your work, thank you for being with us tonight.